Hello, Totally Brown. I've got a special treat for you today. I've got a gentleman here who's traveled 5 hours to show me his latest finds. And I think you'll find it, as in you being an expert in military, I think you'll find this especially interesting. Okay, Doug, why don't you tell us about your finds?
Yeah, Mark, I was very excited about discovering these two rifles and having the good luck to acquire them through an estate auction. These rifles are both important pieces of Canadiana. They're Ross Model 1905 rifles, known as the Mark II Double Star. And these were the rifles to beat at Bisley in 1909.
Wow.
And they are Ross's classic straight pull. The 1905 version was superseded by a rifle known as the 1910 Mark III, which had a serrated locking lug on the bolt that traveled horizontally and locked vertically. These 1905s are the locking lugs are solid and they travel vertically and lock horizontally. These two rifles with the bolts open are both very similar, some differences in sighting arrangements, but the Rosses on the 1905s, he put a flag safety on them, replacing a button safety on earlier marks.
So that's the flag right there. That yes, okay, yeah.
And so these two rifles, again, are hard to find in this kind of condition. The bores are good. They were fairly heavily metal fouled when I got them, but they cleaned up nicely, and I've just done a little plinking with them. No real serious shooting yet. And the rifle that I'm pointing at here,
I'm going to just pan out a little bit here,
is fitted up with an aftermarket receiver bridge that has the aperture sight mounted on it. And the aperture sight on this rifle is made by the bear with me here.
Certainly.
Is manufactured by the Canada Tool and Specialty Company Limited, New Glasgow, Nova Scotia.
Fascinating.
And it's rather interesting. The bridge is added after the fact, and this sighting arrangement has the aperture fairly close to the eye, and it's got.
So those two screws there, that tells you that was added afterwards.
Yes, yes. And the rifles initially came with no bridge over the receiver.
Gotcha.
And the second example is fitted up with a BSA Parker wind gauge aperture rear sight, and it's set up for long range shooting. And again, an aftermarket bridge arrangement, and you'll notice that the standard military Enfield sight still occurs on both of these examples.
Yeah, right at your fingers there.
Right,
okay.
right by my thumb.
That would be the sight that would be traditionally mounted on armed forces rifles.
Right, and this rifle was the service rifle of the Canadian military at the time, but these are civilian examples. They were made for sale to the public.
So these were made prior to the First War?
Yes, prior to World War I, and there's some minor cosmetic differences. The example closest to me has got case-hardened bolt and receiver.
Let's see if I can get in a little closer there.
Okay, I can. The case colors are a bit faint.
They're a little faint, but I see them.
And the later version, slightly later, has got an all blued steel bolt. That's a bit cosmetic.
Oh, I see. So this is just blued. Okay, gotcha. So that's cosmetic difference.
And one of the features that's unique to the 1905, they had a fully enclosed box magazine similar to a Mauser magazine, but they had something called a Harris dump feed. And you just depressed the lever on the side and it dropped the floor plate.
I'm just going to zoom in and maybe you can demonstrate that again. Oh yes, I see.
So that? And you could, it was dump dump load rim cartridges.
And then as soon as the feed plate came up, the cartridges would automatically align for feeding.
They do, and it's remarkably, it works pretty well. I tried it with dummy cartridges, and they seem to feed nicely. And rimmed cartridges are notorious, as you know, for causing jams if they're loaded into the magazine.
Yeah, if the rims are staggered incorrectly.
Yeah,
you try to feed two at the same time. Yeah. So
what Sir Charles Ross did with this rifle, from an earlier versions of the Mark II 1905, was he added a 30.5-inch barrel to these rifles, replacing, I think it was a 26-inch barrel on the earlier version. And this is a heavier barrel as well.
So a 30.5-inch barrel as opposed to a 26 at the time.
Yes, I believe it was a 26. And so these things gained some notoriety on the ranges, and the English didn't like them.
So when you say notoriety on the ranges, would that be because of noise, or would that because of perhaps certain people of high esteem on the range were getting, shall we say, beaten by this rifle?
That's what I understand, and I understand there was some English gunmakers who were not happy, and they tried to have the rifle banned, and the Minister of Defense at the time said he was going to pull all support to the NRA out if they were banned.
Do you recall that fellow's name at this time, or?
I believe it was Sam Hughes.
Oh, Sam Hughes, okay.
I might stand corrected, but...
he didn't live far from here in Lindsay, Ontario at one time.
He was a local famous gentleman, and at any rate, they allowed the Canadian team to shoot these rifles. The argument was that it wasn't a service rifle, and the Minister of Defense assured them it indeed was. Although these particular versions are not military versions because they will not take a bayonet. Because
I see.
The muzzle cap or the fore-end cap with the extended barrel length wouldn't fit the bayonet that was set up for a 26-inch barrel.
Yes.
So
Gotcha.
You will see in this example in the Ross rifle story an example here of a military form with an extended bayonet lug, so you could fit a bayonet to a 30.5-inch barrel.
Oh yes, there I see it's sticking out. Yep, excellent. So that was the major difference between these models.
It was. This particular model, again, was made up for civilian sales.
Yes,
and
because
it was a military match, and again, my understanding was that these cost about $50 when you could buy a lever action 94 Winchester for about $18.
Wow, substantial.
So they were, there was a fair bit of cash to lay out prior to the First World War.
Well, there's a lot of machining work here. I see. It's it seems much more complex than even the Mauser, which was expensive to build.
They were high quality guns. Even the wood usually has a bit of figure to it.
Yes, I noticed this one here. This doesn't show up in the camera very well often, but it does have a bit of fiddleback in the walnut, a little bit of curl.
Yeah, I'm presuming it was quarter sawn, and at any rate, these rifles have come down through more than a century in pretty good condition, and it's probably because they were built as match rifles that they didn't get dragged around to the deer camp. And somebody has looked after them for over a century, and now it's my turn.
So are these rifles chambered in the 280 Ross cartridge?
No, this is set up in the standard military cartridge of the day. It was a 303 British.
Right.
311 diameter bullet, shooting 174 grain Spitzer at about 2,400 feet per second.
Gotcha.
But and that remained, I guess, in the 303 cartridge in Canadian use until 1956.
Right. Now, would there be at any time during the time frame in which these particular rifles were manufactured, would they have been chambered at any time in 280 Ross?
He had models similar to this in 280 Ross, but the It was a model 1907. I better not say too much more in case I'm making errors here. The 1910 action with the serrated locking lugs was designed around the cartridge they were made up for the Canadian Army in 303 British, but he designed the rifle around the 280 Ross, which would push a 145 grain bullet out the muzzle at over 3,000 feet per second.
Wow, that's yeah, you're talking 7mm Remington Magnum specifics nowadays.
In 1910.
In 1910.
So Sir Charles envisioned the British Commonwealth adopting the 280 Ross cartridge and his Mark III 1910 action around it. And of course World War I prevented that, and probably a lot of other circumstances did as well.
Which is ironic given the fact that my understanding is that he was building these rifles with the idea that they would become a military rifle for the British Empire.
That's what his hope was. And again, World War I intervened, and they weren't going to change horses in midstream. The British had been working on a 276 cartridge in a Mauser type action, and they abandoned that, and it became eventually a P14 in 303 British. But
right.
The 1905s remained in use with units back in Canada and so on, but what the troops took into the trenches overseas was the 1910 example. I've seen some writers indicate that they felt Sir Charles' best design was the 1905 and he should have stuck with it. But he was apparently had an ambitious mind, and he was making modifications at all times. I've seen examples of these 1905 military match rifles a little later manufacture. He's done away entirely with the military Enfield rear sight, and he just has a one-piece handguard and did away with the two-piece handguard.
So that would have been deleted in those future models.
Yes, if you happen to acquire a copy of the Ross Rifle Story, it's well illustrated. You can see the evolution as they go along. But yeah, they were highly thought of back in the day, and Sir Charles was certainly a very interesting individual, and sometimes I think history was a little harder on him than he deserved, but he apparently wasn't one to be idle for too long. He was always inventing something else.
So Canadian soldiers, the Canadian Expeditionary Force, were issued these rifles at some point during the First War?
Right at the beginning, but I think most of them were turned into stores before they went overseas.
I see.
The Mark III was the famous Ross that went into the trenches, and they had an unfortunate issue with difficulty in extraction, and part of that is a design with the straight pull. You don't get the torque you get with a
you don't get the camming action.
The camming action you get with a Mauser or even a Lee-Enfield. So when the troops were issued with oversized soft brass wartime produced British ammunition, they tended to stick in the chambers when they got hot and dirty. And the Canadian chambers were tight. They were tighter than below spec, so to speak. And they worked well with Canadian issued ammunition, but not with the British stuff. So the horror stories began to come back from Flanders that at the Second Battle of Ypres, that the Canadian troops using the Ross 1910 model in 1915, where primary extraction became so difficult that they were opening bolts with boot heels and entrenching tools when the Germans were coming at them, which caused the troops to lose faith with the rifles. And another design flaw in the 1910, which doesn't relate to these two rifles, was that the bolt stop on the bolt stop in the receiver, engaged just a small area of the bolt head, and too small an area, and when they were forcefully opened with a boot heel or an entrenching tool, the harder it was to open, you began to bend and burr the bolt lug, and so the harder, the more you used it, the more difficult it became. So opening the bolt with a boot heel just exacerbated the problem.
Right.
And so troops were throwing away the Mark IIIs and picking up Lee-Enfields and Mausers off dead soldiers on the battlefield.
Yes.
So it became a major scandal, probably bigger than the Avro Arrow scandal. And it cost the job of the Minister of Defense, lost his job over the Ross rifle. So at any rate, these pair are real pieces of Canadiana, and I hope to get out and shoot them a bit with Mark and see if my old eyes can get any kind of a group with them. But there's nothing wrong with the rifles, I don't think. So
well, we'll find out tomorrow. We're going to go to the range, and we may have an update from that. And
or maybe not.
is there anything you'd like to add to this briefly, Doug?
No, I think I've talked too much already. But
no, it's been quite interesting, and you're my first guest on YouTube, so.
Well, I'm grateful, Mark. I'm flattered, and but I just really wanted to share my excitement in these two acquisitions, and
well, your enthusiasm shows through in your presentation. So there it is, Totally Brown. There's some rare Canadiana, maybe something you can ditch that Lee-Enfield you spent so much time with, and maybe find a Ross for yourself.
Good luck. They're hard to find.
Take care. And bye-bye.